Welcome to the Benson Wealth Podcast. I take complex financial and economic topics and make it accessible to the everyday listener. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Benson Wealth Podcast. My name is Drew Benson. I'm the president and founder of Benson Wealth Management and a senior wealth advisor with my broker-dealer, Raymond James. I'm also the co-managing partner for True North Wealth Management Group, which is a platform for independent wealth advisors. I'm a formerly trained macroeconomist and a certified financial planner. So today I interview Peter Earle. Pete works for the American Institute for Economic Research. He also holds a PhD in economics and is a former Wall Street trader. So this is the second part of a two-part interview. In the second part of this interview, Pete and I talk about the recent push for the United States to implement central bank digital currencies. We unpack the unintended consequences of such a move. So, Pete, this was great talking about GDP versus GDPP. We've talked about potentially recession on the horizon. I'm going to switch gears to our next topic, which is about digital currencies. And as we get into this subject, I want to step back and I'd like for you to define some terms because
sure.
for a lot of people, you know, they've heard of Bitcoin, but they don't know what Bitcoin is. They've heard that there could be some government-backed cryptocurrencies, but they don't know what that means. So
right.
let's just start with the basic, like what simply, right? What is Bitcoin? What are cryptocurrencies? And then what about the government and their sort of use case for it as well?
Cryptocurrencies are peer-to-peer monetary, let's call them peer-to-peer electronic cash systems where all of the information is stored on what's called a blockchain. And the clearing of transactions takes place by miners. So what that means, and they're also decentralized. Now, I have to quickly say, 10, 15, 12 years ago, there was basically Bitcoin and nothing else. And Bitcoin is decentralized, has all these other features. There are now thousands of coins, thousands of cryptos out there, some of which are not cryptos at all. Some of them are just tokens. Some of them are a complete scam. So, in the ideal state, you have something like Bitcoin, where it's algorithmically programmed that there'll never be more than, I think, 21.7 or 21.8 million of them. They're transferred electronically, and they use a form of cryptography that makes it very hard to break into or to sort of to interfere with the blockchain. And they started out a penny, 2 pennies, 5 pennies, and now 1 Bitcoin is, I don't know what it is today, $61,000, $65,000.
Yep.
And it's the facts about or the factors in crypto that make it sort of undesirable to government officials is that, first of all, it's decentralized, and second of all, it's very difficult to track. It's not anonymous, but it's pseudonymous because
yep.
If you were to watch the blockchain, and by the way, the blockchain is public, so anybody can go in and see transactions. They just can't see who those transactions are being done
yeah.
by.
It's kind of fascinating to watch it, by the way. I've watched all these little transactions going through in milliseconds.
Yeah. So that's the basic thing about Bitcoin, and of course, the way that blocks are cleared, uses different protocols. So there's for example, there's proof of stake, proof of work, some others. Usually, what happens is miners basically they compete to clear transactions. The one that clears the most transactions and packages those transactions in a block, will eventually get a reward, and that reward will be future Bitcoins. And every few years, there's an increase in the difficulty, and that becomes the halving, where at some point the rewards for the Bitcoin reward for clearing for mining a block and packaging a block is halved. I don't know what we're at right now, 3.25 maybe Bitcoin per is the reward. I'm not sure, but I remember when it was much higher. But anyway, it's getting harder and harder to package these blocks. It's getting harder to mine them. But I guess that's a pretty basic overview, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no, I think that's really. No. I think you've hit all the major sort of points.
Okay.
My understanding too is that one of the reasons that Bitcoin was created is that it wouldn't have the same loss in purchasing power the way you would see with sort of traditional government fiat money would maybe one other thing I would add. And do you think that's true, particularly with things like Bitcoin and say Ethereum?
Because it's algorithmically limited to 21.8 million Bitcoin. There'll never be more than that. For that reason, it's essentially unless the actual code is changed, which probably would not happen because that would destroy the value of Bitcoin. And there certainly are some cryptos out there that don't have that algorithmic limiting in it. The idea is that it'll be more valuable over time, so it'll actually gain in purchasing power, something that we haven't seen since gold or that sort of thing over time. And the sort of the slow increase in purchasing power over time that we saw in the second half of the 19th century, you would actually see over time in Bitcoin.
Which is the inverse of what we're experiencing with typical government fiat currencies like the dollar or the euro, et cetera. Okay, so then we've laid that out. Then what are central bank digital currencies? And how are they different?
So CBDCs are essentially it's a digital form of central bank money that's issued by the country's central bank. So first of all, Bitcoin does not have a somebody who's in charge or something like that. It's decentralized, and there's all sorts of other there's all sorts of miners all over the world that are taking part. Whereas that's sort of the difference between a public and a private blockchain. A private blockchain would actually have an administrator or a designated blockchain overseer in charge. Whether or not CBDCs have a blockchain, they are issued by a central bank, and the central bank is going to basically set the rules for how these things are used, and all that sort of thing. And the other thing is that a central bank digital currency is not going to be quantitatively limited like Bitcoin. So they're going to basically be made to make payments more efficient, accessible, that sort of thing. But to facilitate transactions, now that varies. But I mean, basically that's what a CBDC is. Now there's two forms that we talk about. There's wholesale and there's retail.
Yeah.
A wholesale CBDC is essentially used. The intended use is going to be financial institutions. So, for example, a bank may need to transfer a large sum of money to Bank B to settle a purchase, that sort of thing, cross-border transactions, that sort of thing. That's a wholesale central bank digital currency. And those would probably not have a lot of influence on you and I because it would basically be behind the scenes. It would be quick, it would be cheap, and it would be a way of, upping the security of interbank transactions, that sort of thing, make more of a digital market infrastructure through using digital ledgers. The other side are retail central bank digital currencies. Now those would be intended for use by the general public, and they would essentially be like an electric dollar that you would have in your in an electronic wallet that you can move around. Not much different than say something like PayPal or whatever, but this would be explicitly issued by the central bank, which would mean that they would have essentially full control over it. And there are some sort of nightmare scenarios that have come up. I wrote an article maybe 2 years ago called "Programmable Digital Currencies or Weaponizable Money," and this was not meant to scare anyone. It was just meant to sort of bring people, to make clear what the sort of the dark side of a retail central bank digital currency could be.
Well, right. So as I was reading about them, sort of a first thought that went through my head was, well, it just seems like a more efficient, innovative way for, if we're going to have fiat currencies, sure. Like, why not do it more efficiently? If I can transfer money much more quickly, maybe it would save the United States system in a lot of costs. We wouldn't have to print as much cash. Sure. Like, in one sense, I saw sort of the innovative sign. But you're bringing up another point, and I guess my question is, what are the listen, we're both trained as social scientists, so something that you and I think about, Pete, is what are the unintended consequences? In a vacuum, I can tell you how great something could be. But when you step back and say, all right, if I engage in X or Y, is it going to lead to A, B, and C, and A, B, and C is a really bad situation for me, so I'm not going to do X, even though there's all these good reasons why I should? So what do you see are the unintended consequences? And you wrote a couple articles for your think tank, AIER. So lay out what you think of the potential problems.
So the
here.
one I hear mentioned the most is vulnerability to hacking and cyber attacks. I think that's the least of them, to be honest. That's the one.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Sorry? Yeah.
I said I agree with you. That doesn't make sense to me.
That doesn't worry. I'm no more afraid of that than I am somebody breaking into my bank account digitally.
Same. Same.
Two issues. So first of all is digital currencies. Now some of this contemplates a world that's made cashless. Now, everything about CBDCs would be all the worse if we had a cashless economy. And I'm a big proponent of the idea of never going cashless, of resisting cashless economic, a cashless, electronic only money economy as much as possible, because you lose a lot of freedoms that way. If CBDCs were the only form of money that was permitted, first of all of your finances, it would give rise to a personal finance surveillance state. Everything you do would be seen by the government. Now, that could be seen as a benefit for, say, the Federal Reserve, because they could monitor consumption, all these things. They could have up-to-date sort of data. Anybody who thinks that monetary policy or fiscal policy or whatever could be made better with more data, they would love this. They would think this is a great leap forward. So that's the first thing. But I think more worrisome is the following. Now, there was a German entrepreneur many, many years ago, a century and a half ago, named Silvio Gesell. And he had this idea that if you could basically engineer money to make custom rates of inflation, that would increase consumption, disincentivize saving. You could sort of have, instead of the way the Fed, sets rates and then watches them for a month or a few months or whatever, you could actually sort of engineer consumption and saving in the right proportions to make the economy grow. Now, there's a lot of problems with this idea, but this was the idea. So Gesell proposed money with an expiration date, right? So that, let's say once a week you are required to take your money to a post office, and if the Fed or whatever had said, okay, we want to slow consumption, they would say, okay, your money is good for 2 weeks. If they said, oh my gosh, consumption's falling, we need to spur consumption, you'd say, okay, your money is good for 24 hours. By changing it and the expiration, by making your money expire over a given amount of time, they could provide an incentive to spend quicker or spend more slowly, right? So that's the deal. Now, these are some plans that have been put in place. It is said that in Vorgel, Austria, this was put in place. This was actually experimented with, but central bank digital currencies would make this very easy, and it would, digital money in this way could be engineered like this. And I would say even more worrisome, conceivably customizable. So that's a nightmare scenario. I mean, imagine, engineering a rate of inflation for you specifically as an intermediate form of fine. Instead of a speeding ticket, instead of paying $50, we're going to make your personal inflation rate is going to be 10% for 1 week or something like that. Or imagine, for example, tying everything from, I'm going to use an example that's not popular right now. Everything from mandatory, vaccination to compulsory voting to anything else to be, targeted by monetary penalties. There's some evidence, I'm told that there's evidence that the digital yuan in China may be used in this regard as well for, the social credit rating. So, imagine a period of time where the government says, all right, if you buy domestic goods, your dollars are worth this. If you buy foreign, they're worth this, or vice versa. So that would have to, for that sort of thing to work, it would take a cashless economy. I confess it's a little bit of a science fiction scenario, but I don't think we can afford not to think about these scenarios because of they're being considered. And one of the things that keeps the Fed, any central bank besides the Fed, from implementing negative interest rates is the fact that money would come out of banks and go into mattresses. In a cashless economy, this wouldn't be an option. So, that's why I think that some of these admittedly far out, but still worth considering scenarios should be on our mind as we hear about, moves towards a digital dollar, as we hear politicians saying, things would be so much better with a cashless economy. Don't believe it. We would lose a lot of flexibility without having physical cash to deal with.
Yeah, and clearly these are very serious unintended consequences where the idea of the state being able to monitor my transactions is not very
Every
appealing at
transaction.
all. Every
Yep.
transaction. And
Yep.
then there's a level of ubiquity to the way we spend money, or not ubiquity, there's a level of anonymity is the real word I'm looking for that is
Sure.
that's really, encouraging. But the fact that everything could be scrutinized, or think of some things that misperceived. Maybe you purchase something that the way it shows up on the ledger looks like it looks worse than maybe it actually is. And then that could be used against you in the court of law. That could be used as evidence to smear your reputation. You can see how this could turn into an Orwellian hellscape very quickly. And while
Absolutely.
I'm not, while I don't think our current United States society would be off the charts, I think there's current governments in today's world that would be, and the idea of it is very, very chilling.
I mean,
Yeah,
does anybody think that North Korea would hesitate for a moment to do this?
no,
Not for a
nobody.
moment. If they could, they would. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
and another thing too, just a quick thing I want to mention is when we talk about a cashless economy, we're also talking about an economy where cryptocurrencies, gold, silver, would also have to be either banned or taxed into oblivion, right? So I mean, you could see
yeah, okay.
far stricter rules of ownership. You could see reporting requirements. So whenever anybody talks about a digital dollar, or you hear someone like I can't remember the fellow's name, Kenneth Rogoff, talking about getting rid of $100 bills, that's a small incremental step toward less economic freedom, less financial privacy, and more strictures on one of the most basic rights that we have, which is the ability to consume and invest as we see fit, with our money being our own private property.
So you started to answer my last question for you, Pete, and that's
Yep.
what would this mean for sort of the private digital currency markets like cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin?
Right.
What would that mean?
I think in a cashless economy where CBDCs were being used and they were the only basically legal tender, you would see very harsh penalties for using cryptocurrencies. Because right now, by that point, there would be no reason to gild the lily. It would be absolutely clear that the goal was to see every transaction we do and monitor them, and maybe to create new ways of taxation and all that sort of thing, where there's no potential evasion. So I mean, or avoidance. So I mean, I think that you might see much stricter penalties for owning cryptocurrencies, things like gold and silver. Who knows what else? I mean, in that kind of economy where you have more desperation in terms of what's used for money, you could see other things, criminalized. Copper. I mean, all sorts of physical commodities which have value in certain amounts. You could see those also having reporting requirements. Not being able to buy them in certain amounts, that sort of thing. Again, something of a cartoonish scenario, but again, I would rather think about it in advance and consider the likelihood or all the remote but sort of frightening possibilities than just go into this blithely and watch these innovations without warning people what the end game could be.
Are there any moves even currently to ban cryptocurrencies or to heavily regulate them that you could foresee? I'm surprised the government hasn't come down harder on things like Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Yeah. So that's true. So some countries have. I know that India tried an all-out ban. Ironically, this is kind of interesting because it's something I've been, part of my research program has been de-dollarization. Russia actually had extremely strict rules against cryptocurrencies, but they've actually started to lighten up with them over the last 2 years, and you can imagine why. Because it's easy to transact in stable coins in the same way that it's easy to transact in gold and evade many of the sanctions that have been put on Russia by the United States, the UK, and other countries.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. It's a lot easier to buy your when you're an oligarch. It's easier to get a yacht with stable coins than it is with USD, isn't it?
And to buy oil and all that sort of thing. Because I mean, the ruble is a very sort of weak and small currency, but I mean, gold has value everywhere. So trading tons of gold for oil, receiving gold for selling oil, all those sorts of things, nickel, all the other things that Russia deals in. That's what's happening. And I mean, that's the thing is like, with sanctions, I mean, whether or not you think sanctions should be put on Russia or any other country, it doesn't, whether or not you think that's justified, either way, you have to concede that eventually countries find ways of evading these things. A country like Iran might have and probably should have collapsed decades ago, but people just find ways of transacting, and that's how it is. Cuba too. Cuba's another country that they have found a way of surviving for decades and decades, despite the fact that there have been some really, really onerous sanctions put on them. And Russia's no different. And cryptocurrencies are one way that they are evading the sanctions and able to transact in the market economy.
So then that's one of the criticisms then is like, well, if these private digital currencies like Bitcoin are enabling nefarious actors, isn't that then, Pete, an argument to say we shouldn't have those things and that government currency would be better and safer from a global sort of geopolitical standpoint?
Yeah, I mean,
what would you say back?
A form of that argument has already been made by people who say that Bitcoin is currency for drug dealers and human traffickers. But whenever I had somebody say that to me just last week, and I said, the amount of wrongdoing in the world, the amount of crimes committed in the U.S. dollar is orders of magnitude higher every day in dollars or euros than it is in Bitcoin. And I mean,
great point.
It's just, I mean, it's kind of a, it's not a very fair comparison. I'll just say that. I mean, but there are vested interests that have a lot to lose against Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So they're taking their best shot.
Pete, this has been another really fascinating discussion. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for hashing out these ideas, and I hope we can have you back on in a few months.
I appreciate it. Always great. Hope everything's well. Hope everything's going.
Thanks, Pete.
Yep.
Thanks, Pete.
Talk to you soon.
If you've enjoyed this content and you're looking for a wealth advisor, or if you're a financial advisor and you're looking to make the jump to the independent side, please message me on LinkedIn. Or you can email me at drew.benson@bensonwealthmgt.com. Or lastly, you can call my office at 603-316-2544. Securities offered through Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors, Inc. Benson Wealth Management and True North Wealth Management Group are not registered broker-dealers, and they are independent of Raymond James Financial Services. The foregoing information has been obtained from sources considered to be reliable, but we do not guarantee that it is accurate or complete. It is not a statement of all available data necessary for making an investment decision, and it does not constitute a recommendation. Any opinions are those of myself and not necessarily those of Raymond James. Expressions of opinion are as of this date and are subject to change without notice. There is no guarantee that these statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Investing involves risks, and you may incur a profit or loss regardless of strategy selected.